Back to part 3, and our second component of innovation diffusion theory, which is communication channels. So as we were talking about innovation attributes, at the end there I was talking about ways we can communicate about our innovations to our end users or our target audiences. And obviously communicating about our innovations is going to be critical when we're talking about getting people to adopt whatever it is that our particular innovation might be. So a communication channel, and we've touched on this before in one of our earlier modules, is a means by which we get messages from somebody to somebody else. So we have mass media channels, and those are things that we can think about in terms of radio, TV, streaming services, print media as well, though it seems a little bit old school now, but certainly we do still read newspapers and other online mass media channels, different forms of social media, Twitter, Facebook, and all those sorts of things. That's a way that one or a few individuals can reach many in a fairly simple and increasingly very cost-effective way. Interpersonal channels are more face-to-face, so rather than mass media, which is reaching out to a whole bunch of people all at once, interpersonal channels allow us to have one-on-one communication, often face-to-face and personally, with another individual, maybe two or more, maybe a small group of individuals. So what we know about different channels of communication is that mass media channel, reach from one to many, reaching many individuals, is effective in actually disseminating knowledge, facts and evidence and information about innovations. So that when we come to the innovation adoption process, that's the knowledge stage, just getting information out to people. But interpersonal channels we know are more effective in actually changing individuals' attitudes towards a new idea or innovation. So again, in that innovation adoption process, that's that more persuasion stage. You can chuck information at people, a whole bunch of information at people, and a whole lot of information to a whole lot of people through mass media channels. And again, that will get information out there. But when you're actually wanting to shift people's behavior to not just understanding what your innovation is about, but actually getting them to adopt it, that's where more interpersonal communication channels become effective. And when we start to look at a little bit later on, individual behavior change models, it's that interpersonal communication, it's that richness of media that we use, it's that one-on-one kind of communication that's going to be really effective in actually persuading people to change their behavior to adopt a particular innovation. So communication channels also obviously linked to the social structure of a system. So this comes to the idea that individuals don't just evaluate information about an innovation, through logical argument and reasoning and all those sorts of things. That might be part of it, but they also evaluate innovation based on their social networks, based on what their friends are doing, those strong ties that we've talked about before, what their peers are doing, particularly those who have adopted the innovation perhaps already. They act as what we call role models. So you can think about this in terms of your own networks, I suppose. When you see others adopting something new or different, then you go, hey, what's going on there? How have you found it? Is it working well? Do you like it? And then that will influence your behavior towards that particular innovation as to whether you then go and adopt it. Now, what we call that, and this is a key part of diffusion theory, and we'll keep coming back to this idea of opinion leadership. I think increasingly in social media, you'll see the term influencers used. So, for example, on Instagram and other sort of social media feeds or accounts, you'll find some individuals that have hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of followers, and so they are termed influencers because they are seen as quite central in a network and their opinion is sought and is valued by many others. It's the same sort of thing here in diffusion theory. Remember, this was devised, before all of these sorts of different social media outlets were available to us. But it's the same idea. So opinion leadership is a degree to which somebody can influence informally. Again, this isn't about positional authority or legitimate power that we've talked about before. It's not about managers saying to other people in the organisation, you need to adopt this and this is why. Opinion leadership is informal, but it's basically about how somebody can influence other people to do something. And in our context here, it's to adopt a particular innovation. So opinion leaders are critical for us You might also call them change agents. In a way, they're linked to innovation champions, although those terms are a little bit different. We'll talk about champions in a later module. But basically, it's people who have some power. It's informal in an organisation to influence how others think about an innovation and therefore their adoption of it. So communication channels, what I want you to, I guess, take from this slide is that individuals, again, we need to focus on this fact that innovation, and particularly the diffusion of it, is a social process. So if you simply think about getting people to adopt innovations as a one-way flow of communication, i.e., if you're the innovator or you're the manager or leader in the organisation and you're saying to other people in your team or your department, here's this great thing and we're going to adopt it, and you give them all this information about it, that's probably not going to heighten the degree of adoption. It's a two-way communication. So persuasion, reciprocal communication is really critical in innovation diffusion because it is a social process. It occurs through and within and between people in social networks. And again, that's why these idea opinion leaders who are embedded in social networks and often are quite central in social networks, and we've talked about this idea of centrality before, are going to be so critical in any strategy that you adopt to get people to take on and start using a particular innovation. So what else do we want to know from here? Probably just that last dot point there. Again, this idea of opinion leaders. So you can have expert ones, and they probably hold some expert power that we've talked about before. That can relate to authority and status in an organisation. They're one sort of opinion leader. Often they might be a little bit more formal. Peer opinion leaders exert their influence through representing themselves and others in a social network, and it's about credibility there, which may also relate to expert power, but probably referent power as well. So you'll have different types of opinion leaders, but those that are more effective are going to be the ones that are informal, and are going to be those that are seen as respected and credible in a social network, not necessarily ones who've been placed into a network like a manager and simply telling people to adopt something. So opinion leaders are a way to jumpstart and definitely kind of accelerate the diffusion process. So if you can get somebody or a group of people, might be a few of them within an organisation, who are a specific subset of all potential adopters, but are those key central people in networks, if you get them on board with an innovation, that can really help to accelerate, as I said, your diffusion process. But it's important to remember that, if you need to get opinion leaders on board. So if you identify who these individuals are, these potential opinion leaders in a social network, in an organisational network, you don't want them to be against your innovation. You don't want them to see your innovation as a waste of time, because they can actually serve to thwart the diffusion process. What you need these opinion leaders to do is have a favourable attitude towards the new idea or the new practice. You want them to be able to have that respect and that credibility, so others will look to them and say, okay, well, if this person's adopting this innovation and saying good things about it, then I'm going to think in a similar way. And you want the larger environment as well, outside of the opinion leaders, to be supportive of change at that particular point in time. So again, just know that this idea of opinion leaders, being able to identify them, being able to get them to help you spread information about your innovation is going to be critical in the diffusion process. Now, all I want you to take from this slide is the following. So when diffusion networks, so just think about basically people in an organisation, when there's a great deal of heterophily there. So remember, in our social network module, we looked at this idea of homophily, which is about birds of a feather flock together, people who are similar in terms of demographic characteristics and values and attitudes generally clustered together. We seem to like people who are like us, is a consistent finding in social network research. But when there's a lot of heterophily, it means in diffusion networks, everybody is quite different. There are lots of different groups of people, it's very diverse, that kind of thing. In that sort of context, people generally like to seek out opinion leaders who quite highly educated. They have a lot of mass media, social media exposure, cosmopolitness. What Rogers means there is in terms of people who are sort of worldly, who have quite a wide world view, quite a sort of depth and breadth of general knowledge. People who have a lot of contact with what we might call change agents or opinion leaders within organisations. They might also be opinion leaders themselves. Those are the sorts of people that individuals generally seek out in organisations to help them understand the innovation, to help them gather more information about it. That's all you need to know from that slide. Also, I mentioned before, there is also this idea of change agents. So again, all I expect you to know from this is that if you think about organisational situations and even, I guess in broader community-based innovations, whoever is trying to get the innovation adopted can bring in these people called change agents, and they are specific individuals. They might come from a consultancy or some sort of external organisation, but they come in and their sole job is to try and increase the efficiency and the effectiveness of the diffusion process. So you can see there's a few roles that these change agents play. They can firstly develop an understanding or a need for change within their client population, whoever those people are in the organisation where the innovation is going to be adopted, encourage a flow of information, diagnose if there are any problems or concerns amongst your client population as to whether people don't understand the innovation or they need to find out more on those sorts of things, etc., etc. Basically, they're trying to set the scene for and the context for your particular innovation to be adopted. And you can see there's a few different steps that they can take there. Generally, you want change agents to be exerting a lot of effort in contacting your client population, engaging in information exchange with the people who are going to have to be adopting the innovation, all those sorts of things. So you can see those different points there, but really all I want you to take from this is to know that change agents are just a specific kind of person or group of people that we can bring in to an organisation or a broader setting, might be a community setting, to help us expedite the diffusion process. Now, continuing with this idea of communication channels, I was speaking about heterophily before. Homophily is this idea, again, that birds of a feather flock together, similar people group together. So what we, I guess, can take from this, and again, drawing on our social network knowledge as well, is that an understanding of networks is also critical in diffusion theory. So in terms of homophily, when people who are in quite dense networks, which we've talked about before, who have a lot of strong ties, everybody knows everybody, they're useful for us in terms of diffusion because it can disseminate information quickly. Remember, dense networks are the ones where you have lots of dots, those are the nodes, those are the people, you have lots of ties or links or lines connecting those different nodes. So again, everybody knows everybody. In that kind of network, we know from a diffusion perspective, you can get information flowing really quickly because people trust each other in those sorts of networks quite highly. They're talking to each other all the time. They're interacting with each other all the time. So if you actually plant a seed in that kind of network, then it can, or a seed of information, can spread like a virus quite quickly. So that's can be a good thing, but there's also a flip side. We also know that in those sorts of networks, you can stop a trickle down of information. So even though information can disperse quite quickly, it can be blocked just as quickly as well. Those sorts of networks can stop information from flowing in if people don't think that it's a good idea or they don't feel positive about a particular idea or innovation. They can kind of go into lockdown. So just to know that an individual's network links are an important determinant of whether that person adopts a particular innovation for some of the reasons that I was just talking about before. How interconnected people are in their networks, so if they're an isolate or if they're really central, if they're in a sparse network, if they're in a dense network, it all has an impact on whether they are likely to adopt an innovation. You can see in this last dot point here, personal networks that are radial, excuse me, so those are those sparse networks that we've talked about before, not a lot of links between people. Weak ties, they're useful because they expose people to a lot of different and novel and new information in an organisation. So they can be particularly important in this diffusion process. Just as those dense networks with stronger ties I was talking about before can be as well. Both have pros and cons, but it's important for us to be mindful that networks are important when we're thinking about where people are placed in organisations and what access they have to different information and resources and that sort of thing, an understanding of what your innovation is all about. So one of the last things I wanted to touch on with communication channels is just these few ideas, excuse me, critical mass. So this is the point where enough individuals have actually adopted your particular innovation. So it starts to become self-sustaining. You can start to wind back some of those interventions like use of change agents and use of specific messages and those sorts of things targeting particular people, because enough individuals have actually adopted it that it's becoming embedded in the system. So I think the Rogers reading uses this idea of email, and you can imagine this type of innovation where you need a lot of people to use it, otherwise there's not really any point to it. The more people that you get using it, the better. Each additional adopter actually makes it better for everybody else using the innovation. So with email, if you only had one person using it, it kind of wouldn't work because they're not sending emails to anybody else. But as more and more people start to use that particular technology, and you can think about this too in terms of social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc. I used the example of Google Plus earlier. Google Plus probably needed more and more and more people to be using it, because if it's about social networking, you kind of can't social network on your own. So you do need a lot of people starting to use that particular technology or social media system for it to start to reach a critical mass. So critical mass just means you're reaching a point where you can start to decelerate your diffusion activities in a sense, because you've got enough people adopting it that it starts to become self-sustaining. So interactivity relates to that with the example that I used just now. So we can say that there are some types of innovations that are non-interactive, which means, I guess it's kind of like the opposite of email or the tech ones that I was using there. It's simply innovation where if you just get more and more people to use it, it starts to become more beneficial to future adopters. But if it's an interactive innovation like social media, then the benefits from each new person actually using it doesn't just help future adopters, but also people who have already adopted that innovation earlier. So if you think about Facebook, for example, as more and more people started to use it, suddenly there was a wider community of individuals using it. And so that was better for people who'd already started using it in the past, and then it became more effective and better for people who were using it into the future. And threshold is just the number of individuals who must be engaged in a particular innovation before, or the use of innovation before somebody else will actually join in. So this comes to this idea of adopter categories that we'll come to, like in a little while. So early adopters, later adopters. People who adopt an idea earlier generally don't need so much network influence to help them do that. They'll adopt an idea just because it's new, and so they like to adopt things early. In contrast, people who generally adopt innovations later, and what our innovation category model says in this theory is we call those people late adopters or laggards. It's that they actually need a lot of support and help from their social network to get to the point where they say, oh yeah, okay, I'm going to get on board with this thing. Whereas early adopters kind of will just do it and do it fairly quickly. Those who adopt innovations later need much more support to do so in order to get over what might be a general resistance to change or new innovations. Okay, we'll take a break and then we'll come to our next component of innovation diffusion theory.